One sentence I'd like to highlight from late in Babel 17 is the criminal and artistic consciousness meeting in the same head, speaking the same language. A moment, in this case, the kind of merging of Ridra and the butcher's consciousnesses, that sums up one of the key themes of Delany's work here, and especially here and throughout his work. By the way, we're joined here by my teaching assistant. You'll see him at other points in the semester. He cannot always be kept off my desk. Um, you can think of him as lucky. The criminal and artistic consciousness here are combined. It's not for nothing that Ridra's ship is called the Rambo. She's named after a French poet who lived in the counterculture, who was criminal, who was not simply bohemian, oh, isn't it quaint, but really someone who lived on the rough side of the tracks. Delany is interested in art crossing the rough side of the tracks. Ridra, like HCE in Time Considered as the Helix of Semi-Precious Stones, is is someone who can cross between high and low-end places, but is maybe more comfortable in the grungy places with the criminal element. More importantly, it's made very clear the split here is not between spacers and non-spacers, which would be the easy thing to do. The split is between the customs folk, the spacers who don't actually travel between planets, and transport, the sailors. And they are specifically singled out in Babel 17 as needing an artistic consciousness, which makes them underworld figures. That they need, the way to find a good pilot and navigator, a good pilot is to watch naked body modification wrestling in zero gravity. That shows the reflexes. That in fact, nobody can navigate a spaceship in this novel unless they're in a triadic sexual relationship, right? Like, monogamy just won't cut it. The straights actually can't cope with hyperspace. Um, you know, we see the general and the customs officer. The general returns near the end, and but he is mostly bested. He is out of his depth completely. The customs officer remains out of his depth, but becomes someone who is interested in, who is transport curious, and we see him get body modification near the end. That seems to be slowing down the plot late in the novel, but it has everything to do with the novel's structure and the way it thinks. You needed to see one of these straight characters try to be attracted to and adopt the novel's counterculture. So he's going to get a kind of like grafted on pet dragon that lives in a case on his shoulder. If you think the body modifications we find in Neuromancer in a couple of weeks are weird, you can see kind of where the fictional environment comes from, where Gibson writing a little less than 2 decades later would get these ideas. You can't fly a spaceship through hyperspace unless you're a sexual deviant, but in the course, like in a triple marriage. And I use sexual deviant here, not a pejorative term, but like not a straight, certainly in the terms that it would have been considered in 1966. Art and crime, the criminal underclass and the artistic class, are for Delany together against the bourgeois conventional world, although the artist is privileged to go across and talk to the conventional world too. He wrote this while he's living in the East Village, married in a multiracial marriage between two gay people who are living as straights and raising a child. Living as straights. They are married. They had to they had to go to Detroit, Michigan to get married. There were only 2 states in the Union that would marry somebody of their, they were 18 and 19, of their young age and disparate races. Um, living in like, and Delany takes into the future a kind of recurring modern condition of the artist living in the rough neighborhood alongside the criminals and doing fairly well and not necessarily being separate from them. You know, you're near the drugs, you're near the sex, you're near the kind of outlaw bars. And this is in fact because navigation here is specifically considered an art. that there's a science of space travel and an art of space travel. And you need the artists who are fewer and who tend to be nonconformists, irregular, outright deviants in the basic terms of their society. Only the outlaw artist can get you to the next planet. The butcher in this context seems to Ridra to be a perfectly reasonable and attractive sex partner, right? Like this is a life partner. This is the person you can do a mind meld with. It's going to be great. These two characters complement each other. You notice that we end the novel, the butcher has not yet been cleared of any charges. Ridra's just like, hey, I can talk you out. I can talk your way out of this, right? We're going to have a court case and you're going to get cleared. We're going to talk your way out of it. Not because he's all right and just. And notice too, the revelation that the butcher is really, from this noble family, like the son of this famous weapons designer who we've met earlier in the novel, doesn't graduate him back into the straight, clean bourgeois world. He's still the butcher. He's still who he is. He's still a boundary crossing outlaw. The metaphor is very clear. To move from star to star, you have to be a boundary crosser. You can't cross physical boundaries in this novel unless you cross social boundaries, including the boundary between the living and the dead. Straight, gay, black, white, living, dead. These are all things to be negotiated. Differences to be transversed. So Babel 17 isn't just like a cosmetic, oh, look at our sketchy bar in Mos Eisley Spaceport. It's actually from the perspective of the Mos Eisleyites themselves, where like, yeah, welcome to our hive, scum and villainy. That's what we do. But also, we are more interesting. We have a greater artistic perspective. Look back at the general in that first chapter. His primary emotional position is bafflement. He does not understand anything, Ridra, at all. And because he never crosses boundaries, he stays baffled. He's no Genli Ai. The general's no Genli Ai. He isn't going to move from bafflement to a greater experiential understanding. Here, it's got to be an experiential understanding, and it means a walk on the wild side. There's no other way to get from star to star.